Thanks for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. I have Lior from Monte Carlo. So Lior, if you could introduce yourself and give a little bit of background on the company, and let's get to it.
Yeah. Hi, Tony. It's nice to be here. My name is Lior. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Monte Carlo. We're building solutions for agent observability, meaning we help companies that are deploying agentic solutions, internally or externally, to trust those agents, to understand what they're doing and how they're doing it, and whether they're doing the right things. We've been at it for 6-7 years now. It's been a lot of fun. Prior to Monte Carlo, I worked in a number of startups, and also in security, which I know you like, Tony, and also machine learning and AI. So those are topics that are near and dear to my heart. And yeah, excited for the conversation today.
All right. Yeah, I mean, let's kind of start with that background, and that one of the things that I brought up a few times on this podcast is that as much as there's all the hype around, OpenAI came out, ChatGPT came out, we've got Claude, we've got Perplexity, we've got Copilot, all these different tools. And generative AI and agentic AI are creating this sort of seismic shift in how we do cybersecurity, both from the defense side and from the the attack landscape that we have to worry about. But you talked in your background, with your background about previous startups in machine learning and AI, and it's like, yeah, we were already doing AI and machine learning, so the concept isn't new to cybersecurity, I guess, is the short way of putting it. Like, it's an evolution of what we were doing, but like we've been doing AI ML for a decade plus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what's changing, at least from my perspective, what's changing is that the LLMs that power ChatGPT and Claude have actually democratized the use of AI and ML, right? So,
right.
I've been in it for many years, but the reality is that until recently, as recent as a year ago, building or using AI or ML to solve business problems was a pretty rare thing. It required fairly well-trained individuals that are experts. It was expensive to build. It had a ton of impact. I've been able to, in my career, I worked on fraud detection systems that were fairly successful, observability systems that were successful, but still was constrained to certain domains. It was very expensive to build. What the LLMs did was basically allow us to apply AI way more broadly across a variety of business problems, right? And we're already seeing a dramatic change in how people, coding is probably the most prominent examples, but we're seeing how it's making real world impact. We're seeing it in customer service. We're seeing it in marketing automation, and content creation, and so many, basically every single business domain, I think, is being disrupted. And the reason is that the LLMs are a much more general purpose solution than in previous ML and AI approaches, and I should say, in a sense, they are available to a broader range of developers to use, right? You don't. I'm not saying it's easy to build agents, especially good ones. It's still a skill that needs to be learned. But I think at this point, it's not restricted to a small population of highly trained data scientists that have a deep background in stats, right? It's something that many engineers and data people as well have been able to learn and adopt, in the past couple of years. And we're seeing the results, right? Like a year or two ago, the situation still looked much like it did 10 years ago in terms of how broadly AI and ML were used for again, in enterprise for business problems. I think that's changing very quickly now. What I'm seeing both in, with our customer, we have over 500 enterprise customers. And what we've also seen in the report we recently released is that at this point, it's almost a majority of companies that have agentic solutions in production, and almost everybody has some level of agentic automation in the enterprise. It's actually a small minority today that don't have it. And that's a pretty radical change that we've seen literally in the last few quarters, and that I think is both exciting in terms of what these businesses are able to accomplish, but it also a whole new set of problems from a security perspective, from a governance perspective, from an operational perspective, and that's where we spend the majority of our time, trying to help solve some of these problems.
Okay. Well, and in that evolution, I think as when generative AI came along, and you had some companies were like, hey, we're going to block all these tools and we don't want you using them, and some companies were like, hey, we want to go all in, and there's a lot of companies in the middle. But at least with generative AI, the issues or the challenges you had came down to mostly either concern over are you sharing sensitive information with the LLM, or are you inadvertently leaking data you shouldn't be leaking, and then the veracity of the output, the quality of the output, and and there's the whole, can it count the number of R's in the word strawberry, and like it, making up quotes that don't exist from people who may or may not exist. And so those are issues, and companies were already kind of struggling with, okay, well, how do we resolve how do we use this to kind of streamline what we're doing and deal with these issues? But then you fast forward to agentic AI, and it's like, okay, well, now when there's issues, it's a much bigger deal. Like, it's one thing if if I ask it to produce something and it gets the number of R's in the word strawberry wrong. It's another thing entirely if it's actually taking actions on my network and getting them wrong. So we've gone to like an order of magnitude higher on the risk scale with agentic. And to your point about the sort of the percentage of organizations using these things, I feel like I agree with you that the majority are, but I would also say that even the ones who wish they weren't are fighting a losing battle, because tools that companies have been using for years, decades, are just embedding AI into them. I mean, even you can't even just Google something anymore. Like your Google by default is an AI generated response. If you want to do something in Microsoft Word, it's like by default, AI is kind of running in the background and weaving itself into there. So it's like you almost can't not use AI.
I agree, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it in our customer base as well. Some of our we have customers that run the gamut all the way from fully adopted AI, and everybody's working out of Claude and everything is agentic, and all the way to customers that probably have adopted very little AI, if anything, and have very strong mandates where you're not, at least you're not supposed to use AI unless it's been properly vetted and approved by by compliance, legal, security, and so on and so forth. And if I look at where we were a year ago, what we would do is, okay, great, like there's a feature flag, we can turn off all the AI features in our product. And for those customers that didn't want it, we disable the feature flag, and whenever they're ready to turn it on, whenever it's vetted, great. If they don't want to do it right now, that's fine too. Increasingly, we're finding that to be untenable, if you will, right? Because today, probably the vast majority of the capabilities that we build are agentic. You can no longer, flip a flag and use our solution in a way that's non-agentic, at least without taking away a lot of the value.
Right.
And so we're seeing that tension with our customers. The good news, I think, is that I think companies are gradually realizing that, and there's a lot of pressure as well, a lot of pressure top down to change it as well. I think we're seeing that especially with our enterprise customers, where um, they would say things like, uh, Chuck said we have to adopt AI, Chuck being CEO, right? And so everybody in the organization knows that, and that starts to, break down some of those barriers,
Right.
allow customers to use AI more freely. But agree with you, there's still a lot of friction, and probably justified, right? Like, these agents are truly hard to govern and to observe. And for organizations that care a lot about data security, that have compliance obligations, that have regulations. We oftentimes see it in the financial services sector. This is meaningful risk. Like, they should be putting guardrails there. It's not wrong for them to do that. The challenge is, like, how do you do that while still allowing the organization to modernize and adopt the tooling that will keep these companies competitive. I do fundamentally believe that organizations that don't adopt AI will over time see a significant erosion in their ability to remain competitive in the market. So
That's fair. I mean, it's kind of like I mean, it sounds very negative. I was gonna say it's a you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't kind of thing. But that's a connotation for framing it. But I agree that, like, we already crossed the threshold. Like, there's no going back on this at this point. But one of the things that so, like, Monte Carlo, you guys did the agents in production report.
mm-hmm.
And one of the things that kind of stood out to me in there, it was because I just had this conversation recently, was this the idea of agents accessing, like, data or systems that you weren't aware of or didn't think they should have access to. I think it was like 63% claim that they've 63% of people in the survey said that they've seen this happen. And and like I said, I had that conversation recently where we were talking about how, like, if you hire someone, you hire an entry-level person on your team, and you say, hey, I want you to go do this project, and you give them access rights to files and folders, etc., they're most likely going to just stay in the lane you gave them. But that's not generally how AI agents work. Like, the AI agents might start there. they'll say, okay, well, you've told me I should use these files in this folder, and all right, we're good. But that AI agents tend to think in terms of, and I'm not an expert on this, so I'm just basing this on all the conversations I've had, but they tend to think in terms of just achieving the objective. And the how, like, you might think that the normal process is, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, but the AI agent it's going to scan for all available assets and resources that it can touch. And it's going to try to achieve the objective you've assigned it as efficiently as possible, even if that means going outside your guardrails that you think you established. And I think that's a challenge. And then the other part of the challenge, and I just had this conversation like last week, is the fact that it is all of generative and agentic AI is probabilistic. It's not deterministic. And so even if you have like a log, even if you have the log data and you can go and you can say, okay, this agent did something I didn't want it to do. Let me follow the path back and figure out what happened, where did it go wrong, why did it make these decisions? And it's like, okay, all of that is useful information, and you should explore that and figure that out. But if you gave it the exact same assignment tomorrow, it might not follow that exact same path because it's not deterministic. So even if you could solve that, you don't necessarily solve the problem.
Yes, yeah. I think you're touching on a lot of valid points here. It starts from the fact that it's true for humans too, right? But like agents don't have a sense of right and wrong. They're just trying to to accomplish the mission that was given to them, or the prompt. And the way we let's say I don't want to use the word control, but the way we guardrail humans is we make sure there's the right permission structure and access policies that ensure that a particular human can access only the things that they should be able to access. And I think all of that infrastructure, I don't want to say that it doesn't exist yet with agents, but it's very early. It is still difficult to ensure that agents have the proper access policies. And specifically, the tricky thing is agents are oftentimes used by a lot of different users. How do you ensure that those agents have access to exactly the data that every specific user is supposed to have, right? Like you can maybe set global permissions, right? But still individuals will need to have different levels of access, right? When the agent is acting on their behalf. And I think just the whole governance model around it and technology to actually implement something like that is very nascent. And so what ends up happening is, you either take a very conservative approach and you say, okay, agents just can't access data, and some companies do that, right? But then you're not allowing these agents to be productive in a sense, right? You're limiting what these agents can do. The other option that sometimes people take is, give these agents very broad access, like here's a bunch of documents or here's access to a bunch of tools. But then the risk, of course, is that the individual that use those agents might not or should not see everything that the agent has access to. The agent can't tell. And as you said, it's non-deterministic, so you can kind of, even if you tell the agent, hey, only give a user the information that pertains to them, like the agent might, in some cases, ignore that instruction, right? So you can't really control it very well. And so you end up with this conundrum, and it's going to take some time and tooling to get to a point where we can basically make sure that agents can only use the data that their intended users have access to. So.
Yeah, well, and I just published a thing from I talked to G2 Patel from Cisco a few weeks ago, and he was talking about how one of the challenges is on one level, AI agents are employees. I mean, and you can think of them like you've hired a team of people to do these things, and so you have all these agents and they work for you. But if you had the difference between hiring a team of humans and deploying a team of AI agents is that the AI agents don't have common sense and they don't have a fear of consequences. They're not worried about, well, if I make this mistake, you're going to fire me. They don't care.
Yeah.
And anecdotally, I actually, like on an episode, like 2 episodes ago of this podcast, I was talking with someone about that they've actually seen situations where agents hit a roadblock where they said, okay, I would like to access this data, but I don't have access to the data, but have figured out the workaround by saying, okay, well, let me go talk to this other agent that does have access to that data. And I'll just negotiate for that agent to go get me what I need. And again, like that could happen with humans too. Like, you could say, hey, Tony, you only have access to this folder, and then you give me an assignment, and I might go, okay, but I need this other information that the finance team has. Let me go contact someone in finance and see if they can give me this information. And they may or may not give it to me, but it's like the fact that the AI agents are kind of like negotiating their way around guardrails in real time, complicates the matter.
For sure. Yeah. And yes, as you call it, it's the same with humans. But the fundamental difference is there's no accountability, right? And we kind of see that in our world as well with people that build, AI and data systems. You can increasingly do all of, or you can increasingly have agents do all of your work. Like you can have them, build agents for you. Your coding agent, building agent. You can have your coding agent building data pipelines and what have you. Whatever it is that you need to do, agents can do it for you. But the accountability isn't there. You can't just fully delegate something to an agent, or you can, but as you said, you can't fire them. And so increasingly, our role as humans is to build the right process, the right guardrails, the right governance, and the verification, if you will, that allows us to ensure that agents are doing the right thing. And I think that in a way applies to the security world as well, right? We can delegate many of our tasks to agents, but the accountability stays with the humans, and we need systems that allow us to do that, right? We need systems that allow us to understand what these agents are doing, and apply policies to it where needed, and have the right guardrails so that agents do what we expect, right? Because so increasingly we're about accountability and less about our ability to execute tasks or build things with our own hands, in a sense.
Yeah. Well, so going back to the thing I think you've alluded to a couple times is the idea of, you can restrict access to, these, you can cut off the ability for things to happen, but the trade-off is you cut off the potential for productivity as well. And the analogy I would draw with that is I've made that argument many years ago when it came to sort of privacy concerns with like a smartphone, like with my iPhone, because people were like, well, I don't know if I want to turn on the location tracking. I don't know if I want to, share the, calendar info with the digital assistant and stuff. And it's like, you can make that choice. You could say, hey, you know what? I don't want you tracking my location. I don't want to give you access to my calendar. But you're giving up the functionality on the other side of that, which is for it to know when you're supposed to be somewhere, and what's the best way to get there. And, there was definitely a learning curve there when I first started using smartphone-based GPS, and I'd be driving somewhere, and I'd have it on, like I'd be driving somewhere that I know, like it's in my town, and so I'm in familiar territory. I already know how to get from point A to point B, and the phone would say, "Hey, turn left here," and I'm like, "I'm not supposed to turn left here. What are you on crack?" And I'd keep going, only to find out there was a reason it said to turn left. It's because there was an accident up there. There's all kinds of traffic. And eventually you learn, like, hey, if the phone says turn left, there's probably a good reason and you should probably turn left. But again, that's you have to have a level of trust and a level of confidence in the technology that has to be earned on some level. But you do kind of want to give it as much access as possible so that you can have those benefits. And I would say that when it comes to, going back to the thing I asked about from the report, like, yes, if you give an AI agent a task, it's going to, scan the network and find everything it can find to try to accomplish the objective you've asked it to do. And that might mean that it accesses things that you forgot about or had no idea that it could access. And obviously there are potential governance and compliance issues with that.
Yeah.
But I would say that on the other side of that is there's a potential upside to honestly to the agent. You can do everything, because it's possible the AI agent might find a way to achieve the objective you've asked it for in a much better way than you've ever thought of.
Yeah.
So like you're thinking in a linear sense and saying, hey, I want you to do step 1, step 2, step 3, and you're expecting the AI agent to follow this sort of like human logic flow of how to accomplish the task. But given complete freedom, the AI might find a much better way to do that.
Yeah, it happens to me all the time. I use Claude quite a bit, and sometimes it runs into challenges. I don't know. It can't. There's some limitations in the tools that it uses or the APIs that it uses, and then it's like, oh, would you give me access to the browser, because I can go into apps and do things for you, and on one hand, and it's very creative, and it would allow the agent to do what I wanted to do in a faster, better way. On the other hand, I'm giving the agent a lot of powers, right? Kind of basically giving it all the powers that I have without the restrictions that I've put on on its tooling, etc. And so this comes up all the time, and and even if you go for that model where humans make decisions, like should I let this app track my location, right? The equivalent of that, and with Claude is it keeps asking you, like, should I use this tool? Should you allow me to do this and that and whatever? Which on one hand gives me a lot of control, but on the other hand, I found myself when I have to do it dozens of times a day, I get desensitized. I almost automatically allow, and sometimes I ask Claude to just not ask me for permission because I trust it, and I wanted to just move forward and do things. Obviously, it is a trade-off, and it surfaces in the enterprise context as well. Like, at what points do you involve the human and ask for permissions, and how do you do that just enough to build trust and do the right thing, but also not too much so that the human starts ignoring it. I don't think these are solved problems yet, but it starts from the ability to track these things, right, and to understand what agents are doing, which was kind of foundational to a solution.
Well, and again, I'll draw the parallel to hiring someone to work on your team. When you first hire someone, you've interviewed them, you have some level of confidence that they're able to do the job, or you wouldn't have hired them. And you assign them a task, and you say, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. But your confidence builds over time. It has to be earned. Like, you assign the task, they come back with the project, and you say, okay, yes, this output is what I asked for. Or you give them feedback and say, hey, you know what, that's not really what I asked for. I need you to change this. And over time, you establish that confidence. Ultimately, a year from now, 2 years from now, after the person's been working for you, you just assign a task, and you have a reasonable expectation that the results will be what you asked for. I think that's the way people need to think of AI agents. Is there's an iterative process, and there's going to be a cumulative trust built over time.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge, I think, comes from speed and scale. Like it's one thing if I'm dabbling with AI agents and I create an AI agent right now and I'm just playing with my one AI agent, well, I can do that. But if you fast forward and I've got 50 agents, I've got 100 agents, I've got 250 agents or whatever, it's like my ability to monitor that team of employees diligently is
Right.
going to be greatly decreased.
Right. Yeah. I think those are very good. And we've experienced it also in our work. We actually had this like case where we built an agent for our customers that our customers would use within the product, and um, the value prop was the dream, right? It kind of does everything for you. You just tell it what to do in vague terms, and it will go ahead and fully execute on it. Um, um, we learned users don't like that. It's exactly what you said, right? Like, you need to build trust, right? Um, you need to let them do it based on what the agent proposes a number of times before they gain the confidence to say, "Hey, agent, just do this for me." So we kind of learned it the hard way that um, while it sounds amazing, right? Like you just it sounds like the dream. The agent just does everything for you, but that's not what humans really want. They want a path or a gradual path where
Yeah, at
the
least not
agent
out
is
of the gate.
increasingly autonomous over time after they've had a chance to um, to inspect how it works and how well it does.
Well, so one of the things that has occurred to me is, and this actually kind of ties back to, I was going to bring this point up earlier, is that one of the cool things about generative AI and agentic AI is you can actually at some point ask the tool how you can use the tool better. And that's not a thing you can do with most things. Like I don't have a way, like if I'm using Microsoft Word, like it doesn't really have a way to help me use it better. I mean, not in the way that AI is. So like you could literally just ask the AI like, hey, is there a better way to have achieved this objective? And kind of like iteratively learn from each other in that way. And I think one of the challenges is if we keep the limitations on, if we keep sort of tight guardrails on the AI, we constrain our ability to get the value out of it. Because again, like if I'm only going to give it access to do what I do and think like I think, I'm not using the full potential.
Mhm.
And the thing is, I don't necessarily know the best way to write. I guess my example I would use would be like, if I call someone because I want to, you know, uh, I don't know, I want to, remodel the kitchen. Now, it's, that's something I could do, like given enough YouTube videos and and trips to Home Depot, like I could figure it out. I could do it. But when I call a contractor, like I'm relying on their expertise, and I'm expecting them to come to the table with knowledge and experience that I don't have, so that because they'll know, instead of me being in the position where I have to know what question to ask, they'll know where to guide me. And that I think is the difference, where it's like um you don't want the agentic AI to be forced into a position where you have to know the answers to tell it what to do. Like the whole point is to say, okay, well, no, I want you to help me figure out what's the question I'm not asking.
Yeah. I would even take it a step further and, um, you know, um, I think, by the way, that's been a radical shift that we're seeing, both inside our company and inside our customers' company, where, um, you can increasingly rely on AI to help you troubleshoot problems with AI or other problems, right? Like you're less dependent on other humans or experts because AI kind of has this very broad knowledge about how to solve problems and how to make progress and how to make things better. What I find mind-blowing though is that we're increasingly seeing cases where we're taking the human out of the loop in a sense, right? It's no longer dependent on a user asking the AI, well, how can we solve this problem better? Or how can we, or how can we remodel the kitchen? Instead, we're seeing increasingly models where AI basically looks at its work and can do it at scale, right? It can look at all of the all of the interactions, all the actions that it took over a period of time, spot what could have been better, and propose changes to itself in order to execute on it, right? So imagine, I think the analogy to the kitchen remodeling problem is, AI that, after it's remodeled 10 houses would go look back, automatically retrospect, like, how could we have built the kitchen better? And then next time it works, it's going to actually build a better kitchen because it learns, hey, these are the designs that work better. These are the suppliers that work better. This is a particular
and that's
that
the
works
same,
better.
and that's the same expertise that I expect from someone who does that for a living. Like yes, anybody could do, like, there, it's not rocket science. Anybody could refinish the kitchen, with enough time, enough tools, enough research, you could do it. But there is a learning curve. Like I've done enough projects to know, like, when you do it, you learn, oh, I could have done this, and that would have been, it would have been a cleaner cut, or that would have been a nicer look, or whatever. And if you're dealing with someone who does that for a living, they're coming into the equation with that knowledge, and so they don't have to do it the hard way first to figure it out.
Yeah.
I think I guess the sort of dark side of that analogy is I also typically use a similar logic when I go to, say, a doctor. Like, I go to the doctor, and my assumption is you should know more than me. Like, that's why I'm coming to see you, because I couldn't figure this out, and I want you to help me figure out what's going on. So I expect you to know more than me. But my personal experience has been that's about a 50-50 shot with doctors. Like, a lot of doctors just they have a God complex. They jump to the easiest conclusion, with even if the evidence doesn't back it up. And so, like, you always have to kind of second guess the doctor. You can't just accept what the doctor tells you. You have to kind of like go back and do some research and go, okay, well, is this doctor right? Do I need to ask a second doctor? And so there's that too. It's like, well, you don't want to put too much faith in it.
Absolutely. And I think, remarkably, by the way, I've by now learned of 3 different cases where people were able to use AI to solve medical or not to solve, but to diagnose medical problems that doctors couldn't. Right. And I think, what AI does is it kind of gives you this like aggregated access to a lot of data and a lot of expertise that in the past would have required, talking to a lot of individual human experts. So it really accelerates and democratizes, in a sense, access to that information. But AI can make mistakes too, just like human. It does all the time. We see that happening all the time. And so, and this goes back to, the some of the things we mentioned earlier, which is you want to trust and verify, right? AI is extremely powerful, but it too also needs to be properly observed, analyzed, retrospected, and then improved over time, because it does make mistakes. And so, it's an amazing companion that you should also second guess, just like you second guess your human doctors, in a sense.
Well, and I think the thing that average users need to be educated about and need to remember is these things will get better over time. Like if you're using an AI agent, like it will learn, it does take the feedback. Like, when I use Claude, it's like when I tell it, hey, just don't ever do that. It makes a note in its memory. It says, okay, for all future projects, I won't do that. And so it is iterative. It does learn over time. It's never going to be infallible. And so like people should not expect perfection, just like you would never expect perfection from a human employee. Mistakes happen. So even if we get it to where our probabilistic AI agent is 99.99999% accurate, it's still not infallible, and mistakes can be made. And so you can never fully relinquish control, but at the same time, you very quickly have to build up enough trust to relinquish as much control as possible because of what I said earlier. The speed and scale at which this is exploding is going to very quickly get beyond your ability to monitor it on a day-to-day basis. So you're going to still have to figure out how to monitor and how to like spot check output from agents and make sure they're staying on the right path, but you're not going to be able to do it on a decision by decision basis.
Exactly. And that's exactly the spot on the kind of journey we're going on with our customers, right? Like they are gradually transitioning from, I'll call it, pilot to production. Like, and pilot looks like, there's a handful of developers building an agent to solve a specific problem. And, they're still testing the thing. And as long as you're testing the thing, you can kind of eyeball everything. You can look at every single conversation, at every single use of a tool, at every single reasoning step, at every single output, if you will, and make a judgment on it. Like, is it good? Is it bad? Do I trust it? And iterate on it. What's happening though is, as we said, like over the past few months, like and increasingly a majority of, I think it's 46% right now, which means it's going to be a majority in no time, of enterprise already are putting these things in production. And once they're in production, and as you said, it's not just one agent, it's like 50, and very soon thereafter 500. That approach no longer works because you can't have a human inspect every single agent, action or interaction and fully understand it and fully verify it. And so what we're trying to help our customers with is basically making that leap, right? Like getting to a point where you have visibility into what all these dozens and hundreds and sometimes hundreds of agents are doing, and then also have a scalable way to measure essentially how well those behaviors and those outputs align to what you want, and how good the quality is, and help build that trust, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like you said, it's extremely hard to do, but also inevitable, right? Because I think all businesses are feeling the pressure right now to get these agents into production, to unlock the business value, to to allow these agents to do more, not less. And so it's a constant pull on both sides, right? And we're trying to assist with exactly what you described.
Right. Yeah, and going back on that point, it's like a lot of companies will beta test a product. You have a limited beta test of whether it's a product you're buying and you're deploying in your network. You might have like a pilot group that you kind of test that out with. If you've made a product, you might beta test it with an audience to say, okay, does this do what we think it should do? Or if you're deploying a rebuild of your website, you might do that in like a sandbox environment, within your network, just to be like, okay, does this run and do what we think it's supposed to be doing? And those are necessary steps, but almost inevitably there are factors that you didn't account for. Like as soon as you deploy it broadly, all of a sudden you find out like, oh, okay, there were things in my controlled environment that are not controlled out in the real world, and that becomes a problem. So you have to be ready, for those things because it's just not always going to behave the way you want it to behave. But I think,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's exacerbate this problem, right? Because like if you're most products, pre-agent, um, they can still be used in creative ways, but they have so many, buttons, if you will, right?
yeah,
And agents oftentimes take, free form input from a human that can ask them almost anything. And so it's increasingly harder to test these things in a lab, in a pilot, and feel really confident about what's going to happen once you put it out there and put it in the hands of people, let alone people with uh, malicious intentions. But even people with good intentions will kind of um, increase the envelope, right, and push the boundaries and test this thing in all kinds of ways. And add on top of that the fact that you called it out earlier that these agents are not non-deterministic. Like you're by definition not going to get the same result every time you do the same thing. And so all of that adds a meaningful amount of complexity that happens outside of the testing lab.
yeah. Well, I think, at least for now, in the early days that we're in now, um, there was another thing that Jitu Patel has said that I think resonates, which is when you're deploying these things and you're saying, hey, I'm going to make these AI agents, I'm going to have them go do these things, make them things that you can undo. Make them like that, because I mean that ultimately, like especially as you're trying to build up trust, um, it's like if you're going into it basically expecting that something's going to go wrong. There's going to be something about this output that's not going to be what I wanted. It's a learning process. The trust has to be built over time. Then you don't want to assign it a task that, if it messes up, cannot be fixed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. It all needs to be very reversible for certainly for the time being and possibly forever, perhaps, right? And in the same way that we humans always peer review each other and double check each other, the same holds true for agents, which means we want all their actions to be reversible. I strongly agree with that sentiment.
Yeah. I know we're sort of coming down on time, and I touched on the report earlier, but I haven't really hit on the report specifically that much. So I want to like kind of wind down on putting it back to you to say, well, what about was there something in the report that stood out to you, or that surprised you in terms of the findings?
Yeah, I think what I was surprised to find out is that again, an almost majority of 46% of enterprises already have agentic solutions in production doing mission critical work. And I think that the even more surprising fact was that um, I think as many as 75% of our respondents said that these solutions were deployed before they felt ready, right? Which means that not all of the necessary guardrails and visibility was in place, which I find striking.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's great for value and innovation, but it also means that we're going to have to do the hard work of putting the guardrails in, and indeed, I would say I think the vast majority of We've seen that in some of the other questions that we asked that I think more than 70% of people expected they were going to materially re-architect their solutions. It's going to require some fundamental changes, which makes sense. I mean, it means people are acknowledging that the early solutions are going to need major changes, and I think it's great. As an industry, we're going on the right path. We're adding more value. We're delivering it, and now we're going to have to make sure it's done in a more controlled manner going forward.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like I sort of understand the motivation, to be like an early adopter and be like, hey, we're gonna get out ahead of this. We're gonna jump on this. We're gonna get ahead of the competition, and by the time anyone else catches up, we're gonna have this AI thing figured out. But it's like if someone came out with a new car and you decided to just jump in and hit the gas. And then as you start going, you go, oh, wait, they haven't actually developed a steering wheel or brakes yet.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have to figure that out.
Yeah. You better install the brakes before you get too close to a tree.
Right.
And that's where we are right now, which is great.
So, all right. Well, it was a fun conversation. I want to thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Tony. I had a great time.